This part of the course is going to have a look at how to answer source questions. Before watching this video, you should make sure that you've watched the previous video on how to answer the normal 30-mark essays in A-level politics. Starting off then, the key thing to keep in mind when answering source questions is that all of your points need to start from the source. You need to explain these points and why they're important, analyse and evaluate them, but crucially, you're going to get 0 AO1 knowledge, AO2 analysis, or AO3 evaluation marks for bringing your own points on either side of the argument in answer to the question. Even if they're brilliantly well explained points, you're getting no marks for them. So the key thing you're being tested on in source questions is your knowledge of an important debate in UK politics, UK government, and your ability to recognise, explain, analyse and evaluate the most important argument points on either side of the argument that you're going to be given. So the test is to recognise these points, be able to explain them and back them up, weigh them up and evaluate them. It's not about looking at the question title and being able to introduce your own points. So I can't stress this enough. Even if you bring in your own points that aren't in the source in answer to the question, you're going to get 0 marks, even if they're really, really good. So let's start by having a look at how to plan and structure source questions. So the structure of source questions should be exactly the same as your 30-mark essay answer, with an introduction, 3 main paragraphs with a for argument, an against argument and a mini conclusion, and then an overall conclusion. As with the 30-mark essays, it's really important that the points within the main paragraphs are matched up well so that you have an effective and natural debate within each paragraph. Before starting to write your source question answer, you should know the points on either side of the argument in each paragraph, just the same as with 30-mark essays, as well as your overall argument, overall judgment and answer in relation to the question. To do so, when you're planning source question answers, what you should do when you get into the exam, get 2 highlighters out, look at the source and go through the source really carefully, picking out all the points for one side of the argument, all of the points for the other side of the argument, and then we're going to have a look at matching them up. So a great way to do this, as I said, is with highlighters, and you should make sure that you pick out the points from the source on either side, not just examples, because often in the source there are also going to be examples that you can use very much in your answer. But we're really looking at the essay question. What is the essay question? And then looking in the source for arguments. So key things that are kind of key arguments in relation to either side of that question. So if I give you a little example here, the question here, if we look down at the bottom, is using the source, evaluate the view that major parties still remain the dominant force in UK politics. So if you get into the exam and you're picking which source question to answer, I wouldn't recommend reading through both. I recommend looking at the question of both of them, question title of both of them, and then deciding based on which question you prefer, so the topic you prefer. So we know here we're looking for, on the one hand, for arguments that major parties do remain the dominant force in UK politics, and on the other side for arguments that major parties don't still remain the dominant force in UK politics. And then what we do, we go up to the start of the source and we're just going to start reading through it carefully. And what you do say, political parties have existed in one form or other since at least the 18th century. They're an essential element of UK politics. So there, a bit of background information, that's not an argument on either side. Next sentence, since the Second World War, all governments in the UK have been formed by either the Labour Party or the Conservative Party. So that's quite a clear argument in favour of the fact that major parties remain the dominant force in UK politics, as there ultimately hasn't been a government without either of them. So we've highlighted that's one of our arguments, the major parties do remain the dominant force. The next sentence then, this did differ in 2010 when the Conservatives and Liberal Democrats formed a coalition government. That's actually an argument for the other side, so we've highlighted that in red, that actually minor parties don't remain the dominant force in UK politics. You saw the Lib Dems playing a really key role recently. And if we look next, the major parties capture the main issues of the day and present choice. It's another key argument that the major parties do remain dominant. And furthermore, the current electoral system favours a few parties in the race to government. That's another really important argument, that the electoral system means that major parties still remain dominant. So we've got our 3 arguments here. This first one, all governments have been formed by the Labour or Tories. Second one, the major parties capture the main issues of the day and present choice. And finally, the current electoral system favours a few parties in the race to government. And we've already also actually got one argument for the other side of the argument. Then we carry on reading. So minority parties over that sit out the traditional big 3, Labour, Conservatives and Liberal Democrats, and have had power over Parliament for over a century. So actually, if you're considering Liberal Democrats as a major party in this, then this argument here wouldn't necessarily work, but I think often you could define this in the introduction and say you are considering the Lib Dems to be a minor party. So that's not necessarily an argument, that's defining minor parties. A significant shift has taken place in politics in recent years, with more people questioning the establishment of Westminster and looking to parties like the SNP, Plaid Cymru, the Green Party in the UK. That's a really clear argument. You've had a shift, major parties are no longer dominant because people are questioning Labour and the Conservatives, and the Lib Dems if you include them, and are supporting minor parties. Then we look on. In 2015, UKIP and the Greens obtained 5 million votes between them, and the SNP reached 56 of the 59 seats available in Scotland. Minority parties are enjoying success and recognition. So it's actually this final one, minority parties enjoying success and recognition. That's the argument. Of course, we can then bring in this example they've given us to support it, but it's this one that's ultimately the argument. And there's another one here. A secure victory is no longer the expected norm for Labour or the Conservative Party. That's a really important argument. They're no longer dominant. So they have much to fear and could lose ground from a range of minority parties. The voter has little to choose from when looking to the major parties. In terms of policy, there's little that separates them, and all the policy they produce is similar, with battles over style as opposed to substance. By contrast, many of the minority parties present a fresh approach to politics. That's another argument again. So we've got here a number of arguments on the one side, a number of arguments on the other side. And in the same way that you do if you can't select themes with your 30-mark essays, what you then do is write down all the arguments on one side, you write down all the arguments on the other side, and then you have a look at matching them up. So here we've put the coalition government argument in, but of course if you're defining the Lib Dems as a minor party, as a major party, sorry, that wouldn't be in, but we've still got 3 other arguments on that side. And then what you do, you look at them, and the goal is to match them up in the most effective way possible, where you create effective debates within the paragraph, so the ones that logically match up. So first paragraph, success in government, we've got since World War II, all of the governments have been formed by Labour and the Conservatives, and that naturally goes against, there was a coalition formed with the Lib Dems in 2010. Of course, you wouldn't be including that one if you're considering the Lib Dems as a major party. Paragraph 2. Success in elections is due to first past the post. So you've got, on the one side, first past the post favours major parties. Pretty clear argument here. And then that naturally goes against the fact that minor parties have gained a lot of support in recent years. That's its argument up here. And a secure victory for Labour and the Conservatives is no longer guaranteed. So a really effective debate within the paragraph about whether first past the post means that major parties are still dominant or whether they're not. And then finally, quite a clear, well matched up final one is about representing the public view. So you've got the major parties capture the issues of the day and present choice. That's this one up here. Versus minor parties have support because the 2 main parties are too similar and they offer a fresh approach to politics. And then, of course, before we start writing, we also want to plan our overall argument. So you look at your source question, pick the particular source question based on the question, not based on reading through both sources because you're just not going to have time. Go through with your highlighters, picking out arguments, making sure they're arguments, not examples, on either side with your 2 highlighters, and then you match them up to create 3 paragraphs where you have effective debates within the paragraphs. Okay, so that's everything in terms of planning. What we'll have a look at now is the introduction. And crucially, we're going to look at differences with 30-mark essays in the introduction, main paragraphs, and conclusion, because a lot of it is very, very similar, and you just keep the same principles we've been looking at so far. So the structure of your introduction is going to be exactly the same. You're going to first introduce the topic, define any key terms. You're then going to show the examiner how your essay will answer the question. That's either by setting out the key themes, so you could have selected 3 themes from the source, if there's 3 themes that come out from matching up the points, or you just say all the points on one side, all the points on the other, and then you state and justify your answer to the question, exactly the same. The only difference is that you should reference the source a bit, so use what we call kind of the language of the source, so mention source, quote a little bit. I've got some phrases here. Overall, the most persuasive argument in the source is. So it's using the language of the source. The first half of the source argues X, and the second half of the source argues Y, if it is split into 2 sides. This essay will analyse 3 key topics in the source, and you will come to an overall conclusion. Just using language of the source a little bit, just make it really clear from the off to the examiner that all of your points are from the source, which you're directly being asked to do. So to give an example of a source question introduction, feel free to pause and look at the particular question this introduction was for. So we started off, as always, with an introductory sentence. So the UK stands out in Europe as one of the only countries the first past the post electoral system, or something similar. So this was a question using the source, evaluate the view that proportional representation would improve elections to the House of Commons. So the UK stands out, with the vast majority of European electoral systems being based on proportional representation. And then we set out the 2 sides of the argument, using this language of the source, because in the source, you got an argument from Caroline Lucas, an argument from Steve Double, who are 2 MPs on either side. So we start by introducing the arguments on one side of the argument, and citing the fact that it's Caroline Lucas. So we're using some language of the source. and we're stating her 3 key arguments that we've selected, and for one of them we quote a little bit. We then do the exact same for the other side, using Steve double, some language of the source again, and then saying those 3 key arguments. So again, we're setting out the overall arguments. And then when we're making our final overall judgment at the end, we're again referencing the arguments in the source as well. So it's very much doing the same in terms of the introduction, just making sure it's clear to the examiner your points from the source, and just saying source a couple of times or using language of the source or quoting a tiny bit is exactly how you want to do that. But mostly, as you'll see with the conclusions as well, introductions and conclusions are very similar. 30-mark essays then. This is where I guess the biggest difference is. So the main difference in the main paragraphs between source questions and the normal kind of 30-mark essays is that in source question answers, your points should always be from the source, as we mentioned at the start. To make sure this is the case, you can use phrases such as one key argument in the source is when you're initially introducing your argument, because then you pretty much give yourself no choice, making sure that it's very much from the source, and also make sure to include a short quote from the source. So your main paragraph should be structured in exactly the same way as your 30 markers. You should start by clearly introducing your point in relation to the question. In a source question answer, as I said, there should always be a point from the source, and you should include a quote. You shouldn't include like a really long quote, but so you should be a small part of it, or you don't necessarily need to quote, you can paraphrase as long as it's clear it's from the source. Then you, again, as with normal 30-mark essays, you explain your point. This is really important for source questions in particular, because really what they're testing you on is being able to look at some key arguments on either side of a debate and be able to explain them, and be able to articulate them well. So you should then explain the point in more detail to demonstrate how it's a strong argument and important in relation to the question. And in doing so, you're going to naturally bring in specific political information and key terms to explain it from your knowledge, so you'll pick up both AO1 and AO2 marks. What you should then do, exactly the same as the 30-mark essay, is bring in a relative example to illustrate your point. So this should be fully explained to show its importance, and this can be either an example from the source. So if there is a good one in the source that directly supports the point, you should use the one from the source, quote it and explain it fully. Or if there isn't one, that's fine, you can use an example from your own knowledge. And then again, you link that example back to the point, just as we do with the 30-mark essays, and that'll make sure that you pick up important analysis marks. You then do exactly the same for the other side of the argument, making sure again the point is based from the source, and the explanation is of a point from the source, and then you do a mini conclusion, kind of stating which side of the argument you agree with and why. So very much the same structure, just the key difference is the point has to start from the source. So I'll give you an example of a source question main paragraph here. Feel free to pause this and have a full read through. You see at the start here, when we're introducing the argument, we're using the quote and we're using the language of the source. So one key argument in the source in favour of major parties still remaining the dominant force in UK politics is that the current electoral system favours few parties in the race to govern. Then I go into this suggests, I'm explaining this point further. This suggests that major parties are still dominant because first past the post favours parties with geographically concentrated support and therefore benefits the two main parties. So it's really, that's what they're testing on, being able to explain the point. And I'm supporting it with an example or statistic. In this case, it's not from the source. And so it's a little bit outdated because I said the recent 2019 general election. You could potentially use a 2024 one if you're writing this now. And then effectively we're actually what we've done here, and I'll talk about this in the A start tip to the end, we're actually brought in another point from the source, which is very relevant and supports the same argument, and then supported it here with an example from the source. And then we've done exactly the same for the other side. Again, introducing a point on the other side from the source, explaining it, supporting it with an example, in this case from the source, and then linking it back to the point, and then we've got our mini conclusion. So doing the exact same thing as a normal 30-mark essay, but making sure the points are from the source, and if you can, your examples are from the source as well. If we look at the conclusion, exactly the same as the introduction. Your conclusion should be the same as 30-mark essays. The only difference is it should reference the source when doing so, the same as the introduction. So we're still kind of really synthesizing our argument, making a really clear argument and justifying it. But as you'll see, if you pause, it's very clear that it's in relation to the source, and using phrases such as the most persuasive argument in the source is that the most persuasive argument overall. It's clear that based on the arguments in the source, this is the most persuasive argument. That kind of thing. So Very much doing the same thing as your conclusion, just using the language of the source a little bit. Final thing we've looked at, we'll look through, as I kind of mentioned when we were looking through that main paragraph example, is tips to get an A star. As with normal 30-mark essays, if you do all of the above really well, you can definitely get an A star. But there are a couple of things that can elevate your answer. Well, there's one in particular thing, if you're confident in being able to do all above. So unlike your 30-mark essays, you shouldn't necessarily add another point to each side of the argument from your own knowledge. Definitely not. Unless, of course, there's another relevant point or subpoint in the source, which we kind of looked at, because you won't pick up any marks for your point. But so you should do that, add another subpoint if there's one from the source to kind of help you reach an A star if you have time. Otherwise, you just kind of bring back the source in your analysis is a really good thing to do. So obviously you start with our points with always quoting the source, and it's fine to start that, explain it, your own example, and link back to it. But one thing really good to do can be when you're linking back to it, is to bring the source back in a little bit rather than just quoting at the start. And if you have some spare time, you can also spend it explaining the point and why it's important in a bit more detail to help you get to an A star, potentially adding another example of your own to support it. So if you can demonstrate to the examiner that you really understand and can explain the political significance of the point in the source, this will really help you to have more complex analysis and pick up more AO2 marks in particular.